in 1998 in Cedar City. At the time of his sentencing, the judge in the case handed down his death sentence, telling Honie he had, quote, earned it. Claudia was his ex-girlfriend's mother and the grandmother of his daughter. The crime scene was so gruesome, the judge told the courtroom, if this isn't a death penalty case, I don't know what is. Now, 25 years later, we have team coverage on the final moments leading up to that death sentence be carried out. We'll start with KSL investigator Daniela Rivera, who has been following this closely. Daniela, the execution is still on schedule despite some 11th hour appeals, and largely they centered around the certain drugs and various other things.
That's right. We learned as his attorneys were exhausting all legal options, attorneys for Taberon Honie then called on Governor Spencer Cox this week to delay the planned execution. We learned that on Monday, seeing a letter sent to Governor Cox from Honie's attorneys claiming the Department of Corrections process has been unnecessarily rushed, shrouded in secrecy, and they were seeking a temporary reprieve to ensure the execution would be carried out properly. In response to this, Utah's Department of Corrections released a statement saying, in part, we have been meticulously planning this process for several months, and we understand the defense has a job to do, but the narrative of a rushed and even reckless process is false.
I think that lawyers, if they're good lawyers, which I think Mr. Honie's team are going to ask for every possible bit of mercy that can be extended to their client.
And that's Robin Marr, Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center, a national nonprofit that tracks these cases. She said if Utah goes through with Honie's execution, we will join a small minority of states actively using the death penalty. Now, despite those arguments, Governor Cox denied the request from Honie's legal team, saying, quote, in making this decision, I am mindful of the fact that Mr. Honie has had every opportunity to challenge his sentence since it was imposed 25 years ago in litigation and before the Board of Pardons and Parole. It's my understanding that Mr. Honie has exhausted his appeals before our state courts. He also had a commutation hearing before the Board of Pardons and Parole. The board declined to commute his sentence. And ultimately, my review of your request indicates that a temporary reprieve is not warranted. Indeed, it is not clear to me that any benefit would come from delaying Mr. Honie's sentence further, and I am thus denying your request for reprieve. And that was the response from Governor Cox this week. And as you can see, things are moving forward here this evening.
Yeah, they are. And as the countdown is going, one of the things that we've been reporting on is that this is the state's first execution in more than 14 years, but it's the state's first execution by lethal injection in more than 20 years. And it's those drugs in the lethal injection that have caused some last-minute delays or talks of delays.
Exactly. It was the drugs that were the subject of all that litigation leading up to this day. And Utah law keeps secrets about the drugs used in executions, including where they come from. Here's everything we do know about the drugs that will be used tonight. Utah law calls for the drug sodium thiopental to be used for lethal injections, but it's widely unavailable. So, in preparation for Taberon Honie's execution, medical staff at Utah's Department of Corrections developed a never-tested 3-drug cocktail: ketamine, an anesthetic, fentanyl for pain, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. But Honie filed a lawsuit arguing the novel combination would constitute cruel and unusual punishment. Instead, his legal team suggested the scarce drug pentobarbital, and the state of Utah was able to get some.
We did have people reach out to us who said that they would be able to supply that, and we decided to go that route.
There's not much Department of Corrections Communications Director Glenn Mills can tell us about where the pentobarbital is coming from. Utah law keeps that secret.
It absolutely is from a reliable source, and we are confident in what we are getting.
According to the Death Penalty Information Center, a nonprofit tracking capital murder cases and executions across the country, secrecy statutes are common in death penalty states.
That means the public cannot really understand who's being asked to conduct these executions, where they are procuring drugs and materials for these executions. many other serious questions.
But Utah did choose to disclose the cost of the drugs. The state will spend $200,000 on 3 doses of pentobarbital, 1 for Honie and 2 backups, a price tag for taxpayers more than 25 times higher than the department's 2 planned doses of the drug combo. But Mills says the state weighed that price tag against the cost of a likely lengthy legal challenge against the combo.
We probably would have spent more than the $200,000.
I hear what you're saying.
Now, as for verifying their purchase, we asked. Mills tells us there's no plan to test those drugs here. Instead, they said they are confident in what they're getting because it comes with a pharmaceutical certificate of authenticity.
It was interesting in the update that we heard about an hour ago. They talked about the need for secrecy in the drugs and in different other things, anonymity and who's here and conducting some of those key roles.
Absolutely. We did hear from Executive Director Brian Redd of the Department of Corrections, and he talked about Utah's secrecy statute, and he went as far as to say without secrecy built into our laws around some of the processes they use, they wouldn't be able to carry out executions. He says that's because people don't want to be connected with executions. Of course, Mr. Honie's defense team has found that to be very problematic in verifying the drugs, verifying how they were transported here. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know how they've been stored. These are all things that they did point out in their court filings. And that's simply what the law says is to be protected and kept secret.
So they can carry out this process.
Yep.
All right, Daniela, thank you. We'll check back in a little bit. As the hours count down and as we near the preparations for this execution, there have been protests and demonstrations going on throughout the day. They started up at the state capitol, and now we, as part of our team coverage, go to Daniel Woodruff, who is at the free speech zone. Daniel, it's expected that protesters will end up there shortly.
Yeah, Deanie, this is the spot designated for people to come and voice their opinions, whether against the death penalty and the execution tonight or for it. It's an area where people can come and get as close to the prison as they can, although there have been concerns that it's not close enough. First, let's kind of show you behind me here. This is the area that has been cordoned off for people to come, and it's really anyone's guess when we'll see people showing up. Obviously, the execution is tonight just after midnight, and we're still several hours ahead of that. But police have set up lights here that they can illuminate as it gets dark, and there are several officers here just kind of keeping track of what's going on so far, but nobody other than the media is here right now. The prison itself is just down that way, maybe a mile and a half away from here. And so this is 700 North and 7800 West in Salt Lake. And we're just, a little ways away from the prison, but we'll be watching closely to see who shows up tonight and what they want to say. Again, they can protest for or against. It'll be interesting to see if it's all those against the death penalty or if there will be some that come supporting the execution that is happening tonight. So at this point, just reporters waiting, Deanie, but we'll certainly keep watching and see who shows up in the next couple of hours.
Daniel, before you go, there's another thing I wanted to ask you about. You had a chance to sit down with 2 journalists who have had the chance to witness an execution. Talk a little bit about their reaction to this.
Yeah, Deanie, the last time Utah had an execution was more than 14 years ago in 2010, and that execution looked very different than this one will. I had a chance to sit down with 2 KSL journalists who were media witnesses of that execution more than 14 years ago. Hear what they had to say as we near the final hours of the Honie case tonight.
When convicted murderer Ronnie Lee Gardner was shot to death by firing squad in 2010, longtime Utah journalists Pat Reevey
It was the first time I'd seen a firing squad execution.
and Cheryl Worsley
I think I'm changed after seeing something like that.
watched it happen.
But I don't think I'll ever be the same.
When a prisoner is executed in Utah, some of those who witness it are reporters. When Gardner was put to death, Pat, now with KSL.com, was working for the Deseret News.
Ronnie Lee was...
Cheryl, who oversees KSL podcasts, was the news director at KSL News Radio.
You're performing the journalistic act of bearing witness to the execution, but how do you process personally watching someone be put to death?
That's a good question. I don't know that you fully process that.
The Gardner execution attracted a lot of publicity.
There's just more worldwide attention to a firing squad execution.
And it left an impression on those who witnessed it.
we were there probably, I don't know, less than a minute, and it just went boom, boom. It kind of was jarring and caught me off guard.
Unlike that one, the upcoming execution of Taberon Honie will be carried out by lethal injection. Pat has witnessed one before.
It's less violent, I guess is the best word. It's more like almost a medical procedure where you see a person lying on a gurney with an IV attached to his arm.
You've seen an execution by firing squad. Is it something you would want to personally witness again?
I mean, for the sake of journalism, I would witness it.
I would not volunteer for it, but if it meant a seat was going to go empty, I would do it again, because we have an obligation. When the state conducts someone's death on our behalf, we need to be there to tell how it's done.
So certainly a lot of differences between the 2010 execution and the one tonight. Pat Reevey, though, from KSL.com, from that story, he will be one of the journalist witnesses present for the execution of Taberon Honie tonight, just after midnight. Deanie.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to him, Daniel, and again, it's a hard situation. It's not something you look forward to, but you do it as part of your responsibility and as part of the journalist's effort there to track how the state carries out this serious matter. Thanks for that perspective. We've got another perspective to share with you. Our KSL investigator, Courtney Johns, looked into Honie's case history, and she tracked down the attorney who first represented Honie when he was charged with this horrific crime.
Yeah, we spoke to the man who led Honie's defense, as well as a man who met Honie after he was sentenced to be executed. And given what Honie has done, it can be hard to hear how they describe him.
He was a blessing.
Working as a plumber for the Utah State Prison in 2022, Cody Killian says Taberon Honie assisted him, a privilege his defense attorney claims no other death row inmate has earned, and a job Killian says Honie used as an opportunity to check in on his friends as he walked the halls.
Always asking people how they're doing. You okay? And nobody else did that.
But shortly after Killian left, Honie tested positive for drugs and got in a fight with an inmate, something Honie claimed was due to him coming closer to his execution date. Prison documents show 6 additional disciplinary infractions, most of which were minor.
He was ideal, an ideal client, and just a good-natured person.
Stephen McCoy says defending Honie was the hardest capital murder case of his career.
This was not an easy case to try.
In 1998, Honie killed his ex-girlfriend's mother, Claudia Ben, stabbing her in the throat and pelvic area while her 3 grandchildren were home. He also admitted to police he tried to rape her, but realized she was dead.
It didn't take him very long to come back for a verdict.
The jury found him guilty of aggravated murder after just 4 hours of deliberation and a 2-day trial. For sentencing, McCoy left it up to the judge, hoping he would put more weight on Honie's difficult upbringing, including abuse, severe poverty, and mental illness.
Somebody gets sort of just washed down the drain, and it could have been okay.
But the judge sentenced him to death, despite Honie's ex testifying she would be satisfied with a life sentence.
There's mercy that one can extend to an individual.
Killian says the path to peace will not be found by losing another life, but he understands why some would see the additional 26 years Honie has had as too much time.
All I can tell you is, knowing Honie, all the people that knew him, he was a good man, and he became something better than what he was.
Honie is now 48 years old, just 1 year younger than his victim Claudia Ben was when he murdered her. Now, Claudia's family has shied away from media coverage, but we wanted to take a moment to remember her life and the impact she left behind. According to her obituary, Claudia grew up in Page, Arizona, had 3 daughters, and later pursued her college degree in the 80s, first with her associate's degree at Southern Utah State College in Cedar City, and then her bachelor's degree, majoring in sociology at the University of Utah. Claudia was a substance abuse counselor for the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah, the vice chairwoman of the Shivwits Band of Paiutes, and the biggest fan of Tina Turner. And while her family hasn't done any on-camera interviews recently, They did speak at Taberon Honie's commutation hearing last month, sharing stories about the woman she was and the lessons she taught them.
She helped me know my strength, my confidence. She taught me to be proud of who I am and where I come from, and to always know my worth.
Claudia was known for helping her family and taking in loved ones when they needed help the most. In fact, the night that she was killed, she was babysitting her 3 grandchildren who were all under the age of 5. Tonight at 10, we're going to hear from more family members about her legacy and why Honie went to her home that night. Back to you, Deanie.
Courtney, thank you. That's important that in all this we remember the victim. Of course, Taberon Honie is set to be executed tonight, just after midnight. It's been 25 years since Utah executed someone by lethal injection. I want to bring back KSL investigator Daniela Rivera. You've had a chance to really dig into Utah's execution policies and procedures, and there really is a set process for all of this.
Absolutely, Dee Dee. From where we're standing, we can see the building where Utah's newly constructed execution chamber is. It's obviously not accessible to us now as they're preparing for tonight's execution, but in this next report, we can take you inside that execution chamber and the preparation that has been underway there for months.
Inside Utah's execution chamber, a designated team is taking part in mandatory rehearsals ahead of the execution scheduled to take place just after midnight on August 8th.
This is something we've been preparing for months. There's a very meticulous plan, and we are dedicated to following it.
Communication Director Glenn Mills says that plan includes an in-chamber team of 6, the Director of Prison Operations and the prison warden, a 2-person IV team tasked with finding a vein, and 2 others, designated executioners.
They would be the ones that prepare and oversee everything that's happening and would also push the drugs.
In the hours leading up to the planned execution, Honie will be placed in an observation cell. He will then be brought here to the state's newly constructed execution chamber.
If all goes according to the Department of Corrections plan, Executive Director Brian Redd will oversee the execution. A viewing gallery will include government and journalist witnesses, up to 5 family members of the victim, and up to 5 witnesses chosen by Taberon Honie. Honie will be given 2 minutes to say any last words, and then the executioners will administer the lethal drug pentobarbital. A physician will be on site to monitor Honie and then certify his death.
We are trying to plan for any type of scenario that could potentially come up.
There's probably a lot of people here who've never participated in a lethal injection.
That would be correct. However, the incident commander who is putting together the plan was here for previous executions. So we are being led in this effort by those who have participated previously.
And we learned this morning that according to that policy, Mr. Honie was placed in the observation cell just after 6 a.m. this morning. And Deanie, we now know a little bit more about how he spent his day.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear the details that they took track of all of his activities, beginning with breakfast. Why don't you outline some of that?
Absolutely. They told us that he had a breakfast sandwich for breakfast today. They also told us that he met with his parents and that most of his time today has been spent with visitors coming and rotating in groups of 2 people at a time. He was given a tablet with movies and such for some entertainment, but as far as the last update we just got at 5:30, he had been spending time with his visitors, who he is allowed to have in that observation cell up until 3 hours before the execution.
There was an interesting conversation about his final meal, which they had said was a hamburger, fries, and a shake, but that wasn't what he wanted to officially remember his final meal as.
Exactly. He asked Department of Corrections staff to tell us that he wanted his last meal to be remembered as a meal he had recently here on campus with his family. Another message we got from his family through corrections staff is actually the pronunciation of his name from his mother. She's corrected our pronunciation. It's Taberon Honie, and we will respect that, of course, and work to pronounce his name correctly. It was kind of them to pass that message along to us so we as journalists can be accurate in our reporting.
To me, it was also insight into how they're handling this whole thing. They're paying attention to detail. They are trying to be transparent and also sensitive to everyone involved, including the family of the the inmate.
Absolutely. The Department of Corrections doesn't take a position on the death penalty. They see it as their statutory duty. This is our system. It is their duty to fulfill what a jury has ordered and now a judge.
From now, we'll get some more updates on how things proceed. We do know that he will be allowed a chance for some final comments.
Absolutely. And as we heard there in the process story, he will be given 2 minutes to speak. And there's written into policy some rules around that. It is an exact 2 minutes. If he continues to go on, they are not in policy to give an opportunity to wrap up. It's an exact 2 minutes, and the statement will be ended early if there's any foul language, according to policy.
We also know who will be his witnesses. He's allowed up to 5 witnesses, just like the victim, and it will be his family members and an attorney.
We learned four family members and one of his defense attorneys. Something else that the Department of Corrections has made an allowance for in this process is his attorney, who's there in the viewing gallery, will have access to a phone just outside the execution chamber. That's something the defense team asked for, and that's so if they see something they feel is violating Mr. Honie's constitutional rights, they can step out and make a call.
Okay. I want to toss now to Andrew Adams, who's also here at the Utah State Prison. He has some additional insights as to how this is going to proceed and what we've learned up to this point. Andrew?
Well, Deanie, we did get another update here within the past half hour, and we're told that Taberon Honie had another mental health check. It sounds like he's doing good, isn't being given any medications to, I guess, help deal with the state that he's in right now. But that was his 4th mental health check of the day. We're also told he's continued to meet with his family, and those family members range from his daughter to his mom to his father to others, apparently 2 at a time for security reasons. Prison officials say his execution has been something that has affected a lot of the people at the prison, including staff. It's something that they say nobody here looks forward to, but they ultimately want to perform this with care and professionalism, ultimately at the end of the day. Now, the day did start early for Honie. At 6:09, we're told he was moved to his visitation cell. He's been, again, meeting with family and others ever since that time. Worked in, as we heard, a last meal around 4:30, which was cheeseburgers, fries, and a shake, although symbolically he would like it remembered as just a meal that he shared with his family here at the prison. And also prison officials, as they're getting ready for this, they have to do some preparations as well. We're told that they're planning to do another run-through of the execution process around 7 o'clock. We're told to this point they've done at least 5 of those. Now, Utah does boast a small death row population. Just 6 men and a 7th recently had his sentence overturned. Now, I did some digging about the makeup of Utah's death row and what it is like for these people behind bars.
Taberon Honie.
They are the names
Ralph Menzies.
and the faces
Douglas Carter.
that make up Utah's death row.
Troy Kell. And Michael Archuleta.
Together, they are 6 men
Vaughn Taylor.
accused of some of the most heinous crimes
Torturing, raping, and murdering.
the state has ever seen.
Slitting her throat and then leaving her body in a canyon.
The Utah Department of Corrections is tasked with housing these convicts until their name is once again called for either lethal injection or the firing squad.
4 of them live in maximum security right now. 2 of them still have higher privileges.
Those higher privileges, corrections officials say, are what make death row life unlike what most expect. Vaughn Taylor and Michael Archuleta are housed among the general population.
And that's due to a program that is called the Last Chance Program.
Officials say the inmates' behavior dictates their treatment, and good behavior offers extra opportunities until their day finally comes.
They are out working jobs. They're taking part in educational activities.
Taberon Honie's planned execution next week will only be the 8th in the state since 1977.
We are human beings. We are carried out with a task that people wouldn't want to be part of.
Adding extra weight to a rare duty.
Really, we're doing it in a caring way as well.
No matter which face ends up being next.
At the end of the day, it's important for us to be able to do that in a professional manner.
Again, a 7th man was on Utah's death row until recently when the Utah State Supreme Court vacated his death sentence. His murder conviction still stands, but again, a new sentencing at the district court level. That's all from here for now. Toss it back to Dean.
All right, Andrew, I appreciate that report. It does give you a history, and if you had a chance, as I know you have, to look at the history of these death row inmates, you are hit with how terrible these crimes are and how somber today's business is. It's this very serious matter, and it's somber is the best word I can use all the way around. Andrew also mentioned that they have had several run-throughs of tonight's event, and I want to bring back in KSL's investigator, Daniela Rivera, to talk about that. There is a process down to each step of what happens. Describe, once they take Honie from the observation chamber into the execution chamber, what happens then?
Absolutely. So that's where the transport team brings him there. And then there's a tie-down team that will secure him to the gurney. After that, there's the IV team we talked about earlier. It's their job to establish the IV lines. And then we, of course, have the administrators overseeing the process. There's the physician on standby. He's given his opportunity to say those last words up to 2 minutes. And then that is when we would expect the order to be given after midnight, of course, and seeing as there's no legal matters at the 11th hour, that the executioners would then begin to push the drugs. And I find it interesting, Andrew's most recent update there, they've done 5 rehearsals and they plan to do a 6th. Policy calls for a minimum of 3. So you get a sense that they really want to get this right. And in talking with the Death Penalty Information Center, they said there are so many ways a situation like this can go awry, and you really can't plan and practice enough. It seems the Department of Corrections is taking that responsibility very seriously.
Very seriously. We've seen that tonight. Thank you, Daniela, for your insights. That wraps up our special edition here. We will continue to cover Utah's first execution in more than a decade on KSL 5 News at 10. And if you missed any of our coverage, you can go to ksltv.com to dig deeper there. But that's it for now on our special digital edition. I'm Deanie Wimmer. Thanks for staying with us.